Abandoned, fragile, and living with Down syndrome. His mother left him, the world gave up, but I never imagined my grandson's gift would turn everything upside down. If you believe in love, hope, and never giving up, subscribe now and be part of our journey. I still remember that morning like it was etched into my bones. I had barely opened my eyes when I heard soft, stifled crying outside the front door. I stumbled over, heart thumping, and there he was, my grandson Daniel. Just 6 years old, clutching a tiny, worn backpack. His almond-shaped eyes, gentle smile, and soft face reflected fear and confusion, but also a spark I couldn't put into words. He had Down syndrome, yes, but that spark told me he was capable of so much, more than the world could imagine. His mother, Rachel, my own daughter, had left him there without a single word. My heart twisted into knots, my hands shook, and for a moment I froze. I bent down and wrapped my arms around him, feeling the warmth of his small body and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I've got you, always." Those first days were chaos. Daniel thrived on routine, the same breakfast, the same songs, the same bedtime rituals. Any deviation would upset him, and yet he was curious, playful, and endlessly observant. I watched him stack cubes, arrange toys by color and size, and notice patterns that I could barely understand. He was brilliant in a way I had never seen before, and I knew deep in my heart that this child, this little boy society often underestimated, was going to shine. I spent hours learning everything I could. Books, videos, articles, I devoured them all. I learned to interpret his gestures, his subtle smiles, the way he hummed when he was happy. I realized that Daniel didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be understood, loved, and supported. And so I learned, one day at a time, how to be the grandmother he deserved. People doubted him. Teachers, neighbors, even some family members whispered that he would never excel academically or socially. But every time I looked into Daniel's eyes, I felt a fire rise inside me. I promised myself that I would fight for him, protect him, and show the world how extraordinary he really was. By the time he was 10, Daniel's abilities had begun to shine. He could solve puzzles in record time, memorize sequences, and most astonishingly, he had a natural talent for coding. Watching him type lines of code with such precision and focus made my chest swell with pride and a touch of disbelief. This boy, who had once been afraid of stepping outside his comfort zone, was creating something remarkable. Then the storm came. Rachel returned, all smiles and false charm, armed with lawyers and documents, claiming she had always been Daniel's guardian. She demanded control over him and the software he had created, a program that could verify important documents, something that could be worth millions. My stomach sank. My grandson, so full of promise and talent, was suddenly facing betrayal from the very person who should have loved him. But Daniel surprised me. Calm, intelligent, and wise beyond his years, he began thinking of ways to protect himself. Even at 10, he understood that the world could be cruel, and he was determined to face it with courage. I couldn't help but weep quietly as I watched him, laughing softly at his small jokes, holding him close, feeling the warmth of his presence. This child, who had been left behind, was destined for greatness. And in that moment, I realized something so profound. Children with Down syndrome are not defined by limitations. They are defined by love, patience, and the unique brilliance they bring into the world. And Daniel, my Daniel, was going to show the world exactly how bright that light could shine. Something in the air shifted that day. I felt it. Our journey had only just begun. The first night Daniel stayed with me, I barely slept. I kept listening to his soft breathing, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, and wondering how a little boy with Down syndrome could have survived abandonment so bravely. My heart ached and swelled at the same time. There was so much fear in his eyes, but also a quiet determination that made me believe he was stronger than anyone guessed. The next morning, I set about creating a routine, a little world where Daniel could feel safe and confident. Breakfast at the same time, a few blocks and cubes to play with, soft music while he explored the room. At first, he hesitated, eyes darting around, unsure if he could trust me. But slowly, tiny smiles began to appear. And then laughter. Oh, that laugh. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. I caught myself grinning until my cheeks hurt, realizing that even in the darkest moments, love could bloom. We spent hours together. I watched him solve puzzles, line up cubes by color, notice patterns in the books I read aloud. His mind was extraordinary. He could remember sequences I struggled with, find solutions I hadn't even imagined. But more than that, he had a gentle, open heart. Every time he reached to hold my hand or pressed his forehead to mine, I felt an overwhelming wave of love and protection. It wasn't always easy. There were tantrums, moments of frustration, and days when I doubted myself. But Daniel had a way of teaching patience I never knew I possessed. I learned to read his cues, the slight tilt of his head, the flicker in his eyes, the way he hummed when he was happy. Slowly, we built a language of trust, of understanding, of silent communication that made us feel like a team. By the time Daniel was 12, he had discovered something incredible, his love for computers. He would sit for hours typing lines of code, creating little programs that amazed me. I watched him with awe and a little disbelief. This child, who had once struggled with basic speech, was now building tools that could change lives. I couldn't stop myself from weeping quietly, tears running down my cheeks as I whispered, "You are amazing, Daniel, more amazing than anyone could ever know." Word began to spread. Teachers who had doubted him started taking notice, and slowly, even other kids began to see his brilliance. But that also meant challenges. People didn't always understand him. Some called him difficult, others thought he couldn't succeed. But every time I saw that spark in his eyes, I felt a fierce protective love flare up inside me. I knew that I had to fight for him, fight for a world that wasn't ready to embrace him fully. And then, just as we began to find our rhythm, his mother returned. Rachel had been gone for years, and now she was back with a lawyer and documents, claiming she had always been Daniel's guardian. She wanted control over him, over his talent, over his future. My chest tightened. The fear returned. But Daniel, he looked at me calmly, hand in mine. And I realized something vital. He was ready. He had the courage, the intelligence, and the heart to face this challenge with me. And in that quiet moment, as we sat together on the sofa, Daniel resting his head on my shoulder, I felt a surge of hope. Children with Down syndrome have a way of teaching the world how to be brave, how to love fully, and how to rise above expectations. And my Daniel, he was about to show the world just how bright that courage could shine. Something shifted in the air, an unspoken promise that no matter what came next, we would face it together, and we would rise. By the time Daniel turned 13, our little world had grown in ways I could never have imagined. Those early days of fear and uncertainty were now memories, replaced by routines filled with laughter, coding projects, and his endless curiosity. Every morning, I would find him at his little desk, cubes neatly lined up beside the laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard as if he were born to do this. Watching him, I often thought about how the world underestimated children like him. People saw his Down syndrome and assumed limitations, limited intelligence, limited potential. But Daniel, he was relentless. He solved puzzles that had me stumped for hours, and sometimes he'd just look at me with those almond-shaped eyes and a tiny, mischievous grin, like he was saying, "I know something you don't." I couldn't help but laugh and shake my head. Oh, how underestimated he was, and yet how brilliantly he exceeded every expectation. School wasn't always kind. Some teachers tried to place him in classrooms that didn't challenge him. Others questioned whether he could handle coding, math, or science. I fought tooth and nail for him, presenting his work, his test results, and even little projects he'd done at home. Each time I saw the spark in his eyes, the determination on his face, I knew I had to be his voice because he had a voice worth listening to. One afternoon, a local technology fair announced a competition for young innovators. Daniel was curious but shy. I encouraged him, whispering, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself." That little push ignited a fire in him. He created a program that could identify patterns in data, a small project at first, but it demonstrated brilliance beyond his years. When the judges announced his name as one of the winners, his face lit up with pride. I wept silently, hugging him so tightly my heart felt like it would burst. But not everyone was thrilled. Rachel, his mother, had been quietly observing, resurfacing occasionally with comments that tried to undermine our progress. I could feel her shadow lingering, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. She wanted control over Daniel, over his life, over his potential. I knew that if we weren't careful, her interference could undo years of growth. Still, Daniel's spirit was unshakable. Despite his mother's absence in his life and the whispers of doubt from the world around him, he smiled. He laughed. He created. His Down syndrome didn't define him. It enhanced his uniqueness, giving him a perspective, a focus, and a patience that many lacked. I often caught myself marveling at him, not just at his brilliance, but at his heart. Every night, as we sat together, Daniel resting his head on my shoulder while I read aloud or whispered stories, I felt a swell of gratitude. He taught me patience I didn't know I had. He reminded me daily that love and belief could triumph over fear and doubt. And in those quiet moments, I felt a spark of hope ignite for what lay ahead. And yet, there was an unease I couldn't shake. Rachel's appearances, the lawyers, the quiet judgments from outsiders, they were a storm on the horizon, and I knew it would come crashing down at some point. But Daniel, with his unshakable focus and gentle heart, was already preparing in ways I could barely comprehend. In the quiet of our living room, surrounded by the soft glow of his computer and the hum of possibilities, I realized one thing: this boy was unstoppable, and the world had no idea what was coming. It was one of those mornings where everything felt a little too quiet. Daniel wasn't at his desk, tinkering with his laptop or lining up his cubes. Instead, he was curled up under a blanket, shivering slightly, his gentle eyes filled with discomfort. My heart sank instantly. Children with Down syndrome often face health vulnerabilities, respiratory issues, frequent colds, and sometimes heart complications, and I feared this could be something serious. I rushed to his side, brushing back his hair and feeling the heat of his forehead. "Daniel, baby, are you okay?" I whispered, trying not to panic, even as my chest tightened with worry. His small hand gripped mine weakly, and he attempted a faint smile, but it wasn't enough to ease the tension twisting inside me. The morning passed with fever and coughing, and I called the doctor immediately. Sitting beside him in the clinic, holding his hand as he clutched his little toy cube, I realized how fragile our world could feel. One unexpected illness could stop everything, and for children like Daniel, these moments were even more dangerous. I fought back tears, trying to stay calm, telling him, "You're strong, my love. We're going to get through this." Even in his weakened state, Daniel's brilliance shone through. He whispered ideas about his coding projects, small solutions to problems he had been tackling the night before. The nurse looked at me, surprised, saying, "Most children wouldn't even think right now, but he's so focused." My heart swelled with pride, but also fear. How many times would he have to fight just to survive? Back home, the routine we had built became a battle. Every spoon of soup, every step toward the bathroom, every nap, it was a delicate dance. I watched him rest, tiny breaths coming in rhythm, and I realized how much love could also feel like terror. I hadn't just been protecting his potential, I was protecting his life. And the world outside, Rachel's looming return, the legal threats, the people who doubted him, suddenly felt like a storm I couldn't control. Days passed. Slowly, the fever broke, and Daniel began to sit up, weak but smiling. I held him close, whispering words of encouragement, reminding him of how remarkable he was. "You're unstoppable, Daniel. You're more than anyone knows." And in his quiet, exhausted way, he gave me that faint smile that always said, "I know, Grandma, I know." But even as relief washed over me, a sense of dread lingered. Children with Down syndrome can have health challenges that come suddenly, unpredictably, and every time it reminds me of how delicate yet extraordinary this life is. I realized then that protecting Daniel wasn't just about love or education or coding skills. It was about guarding every part of him, his health, his happiness, his brilliance. And in that quiet, tense moment, as he leaned against me, I noticed something odd, an unopened envelope lying on the counter, bearing Rachel's name. My stomach dropped. It was as if the storm wasn't over, it was only just gathering strength. Something told me that the fight for Daniel's future wasn't just about brilliance or love anymore. It was about survival, trust, and courage that we hadn't even tapped into yet. Even after Daniel recovered from his illness, a shadow hung over our home. I couldn't shake the unease that came with every knock on the door, every unfamiliar voice outside. Rachel, she had been gone for years, but her presence lingered like a storm cloud, and now it seemed she had a plan. One afternoon, a lawyer arrived, holding a thick folder of documents. My hands trembled as I took them, flipping through pages that claimed Rachel had always maintained custody and financial control over Daniel. I felt a hot wave of fear and disbelief. These were lies, forged and calculated to terrify me, to make me doubt everything I had done for Daniel. My chest tightened. How could someone betray a child like this? Someone so vulnerable, so full of potential. I looked down at Daniel, sitting quietly beside me, his hands fidgeting with his cubes. Even after everything, the abandonment, the illness, the doubts, he was calm. His eyes, so full of determination and quiet brilliance, met mine. I realized then that he wasn't just my grandson. He was my teacher, my partner, my inspiration. Despite the challenges of Down syndrome, despite the world doubting him at every turn, he had this unshakable spirit. Rachel's lawyer demanded meetings, threatened court action, and even suggested Daniel should be moved to another city with her. My heart raced. I had fought so hard for his safety, for his happiness, and now, in the blink of an eye, it was under attack. But Daniel, he didn't panic. He quietly opened his laptop, typing and checking programs he had been working on, solutions, codes, safeguards. Even at 14, he had a mind capable of creating tools no one could easily manipulate. Watching him, I realized the truth. Children with Down syndrome often face layers of misunderstanding and underestimation. But in Daniel, those very challenges had shaped a mind of precision, patience, and extraordinary focus. His illness, his struggles, all of it had built resilience, a quiet genius waiting for the right moment to shine. That night, as we sat together on the sofa, he rested his head on my shoulder. I felt his warmth, his breath steady and calm, and a fierce protective love surged through me. I whispered, "Daniel, whatever she does, whatever comes next, we'll face it together. You are unstoppable, my love." And then it happened. A knock at the door, soft, deliberate. My stomach twisted. I peeked through the peephole. A shadow, familiar and unsettling. Rachel had arrived in person, not just a name on a piece of paper or a lawyer across the table. She was here. The fear hit me like ice water, but Daniel, he didn't flinch. He looked up at me, eyes steady, and gave that little smile that always reminded me. He was more than capable of facing the world. And in that instant, I understood something important. This wasn't just a fight for custody or legality. It was a fight to protect his brilliance, his dignity, and his right to be seen and celebrated as the incredible young man he was. Something about her presence told me this battle would push every limit. But Daniel had already proven that even storms couldn't dim his light. The next morning, Rachel was there. Standing in the doorway, a forced smile plastered on her face, while Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table. My stomach twisted into knots, and I could feel the tension crackling in the air. I had spent years protecting him, building routines, nurturing his gifts, and now, in one swoop, this woman threatened to erase all of it. Rachel claimed she had always been involved, presenting papers that looked official, custody agreements, financial records, signatures that were supposedly hers. Every word she said, every document she waved in the air made my heart pound faster. My head spun with questions, doubts, and fears. But I looked at Daniel, sitting beside me, fingers fidgeting with a cube, his Down syndrome features soft but determined, and I realized he wasn't just vulnerable, he was brilliant. He opened his laptop with quiet confidence, eyes scanning lines of code. Over the years, Daniel had developed a program, something he had been quietly building for months, that could verify document authenticity. Even though he was just 14, his mind was sharp, meticulous, and precise. He didn't panic. He didn't hide. He confronted the problem in the way only he could, with calm intelligence and unwavering focus. As Rachel's lawyer laid out her claims, Daniel typed, clicked, and checked. My breath caught as he leaned back, a small, triumphant smile forming on his face. "Grandma, look," he whispered, pointing to the screen. The documents were fake. Every signature, every claim she had made, it was falsified. The evidence glowed on the screen, clear and undeniable. My chest heaved. Relief, pride, and lingering fear collided. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling his warmth, his calm determination, and whispered, "You are unstoppable, Daniel. I always knew it." Tears ran down my cheeks, but he just smiled, that quiet, gentle smile that carried more strength than anyone in that room could imagine. Rachel's smirk faltered as we presented the proof. Her confidence cracked. I felt a surge of vindication, not just for myself, but for Daniel, for every underestimated child with Down syndrome, for every time the world said they couldn't do it. Daniel had shown that brilliance isn't measured by how normal someone seems, but by the courage, talent, and determination they carry inside. The tension in the room was electric. I could feel her frustration, her rage, and yet Daniel remained calm. Even as she tried to argue, to twist, to manipulate, his quiet genius spoke louder than any words. I realized something then. Children like him teach the world about resilience, patience, and unwavering focus. And he had just shown it to everyone. That night, as we sat together, Daniel resting on my shoulder, I thought about how far we had come. From the frightened little boy abandoned on my doorstep to this young man who could face deceit, challenge, and danger with courage. It was more than I had ever dreamed of. His Down syndrome didn't limit him. It gave him perspective, patience, and a way of seeing the world that was unmatched. And yet, even with this victory, a sense of unease lingered, because someone as determined as Rachel rarely gives up quietly. The morning started like any other, but the weight in my chest told me it wouldn't stay normal for long. Rachel hadn't given up. Her presence lingered, like a shadow in our home, and her legal team was now pressing harder than ever. I could see it in Daniel's eyes, too. He was aware, even at 14, of the threat she posed. But there was something remarkable. He wasn't afraid. We sat together at his little desk, surrounded by cubes, books, and his laptop, his fingers fidgeting slightly as he reviewed lines of code he had been working on. Children with Down syndrome often face subtle challenges, respiratory issues, slower processing of certain tasks, and fatigue from overstimulation. I worried constantly about his health, and even simple stress could make him sick. Yet here he was, focused, patient, brilliant, and calm. Rachel's lawyer had filed papers demanding immediate access to Daniel's financial accounts, claiming she had a legal right to the software he had created. My chest tightened. Years of care, patience, and love seemed to be hanging by a thread. I swallowed hard and knelt beside Daniel, brushing his hair back. "You're safe," I whispered, though my voice trembled. "We've got this together." Daniel's eyes met mine, calm and unwavering. That boy, who the world had often underestimated, was extraordinary. I watched him type rapidly, analyzing the situation with precision. His program, initially built to verify document authenticity, was now helping us prepare for the legal battle. Each line of code he checked was another shield protecting him from deceit and manipulation. I couldn't help but marvel. He was only 14, but his mind had the clarity of a seasoned strategist. The stress of the upcoming court date weighed heavily on us both. I could see the tension affecting him in subtle ways, a slight cough, his hand rubbing against his forehead, but Daniel didn't complain. He was brave, patient, and determined. I realized then that his Down syndrome, often seen as a limitation, had shaped him into someone uniquely resilient. He approached problems differently, thought in patterns others didn't, and had a heart that never gave up, even when people around him doubted him. That evening, as we sat on the sofa, he rested his head on my shoulder. I felt the warmth of his tiny hand clutching mine, and a surge of protective love rushed through me. "You're going to show them, Daniel," I whispered softly. "You're going to prove that your brilliance can't be taken away by lies or fear." He gave a faint smile, a quiet reassurance that made my heart swell. But the tension didn't end there. A knock on the door shattered the calm. I peeked through the window. Rachel had returned unannounced. My stomach lurched, but Daniel didn't flinch. He sat up straight, focused on his laptop, preparing for whatever challenge was coming. I realized something important. He was learning to protect himself, not just rely on me. And in that moment, I felt a mixture of pride, awe, and fear all at once. That night, as the house fell silent, I looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully beside me. The journey wasn't easy. Children with Down syndrome face obstacles the world doesn't always understand. Their health, their social challenges, and the constant underestimation from society make every victory hard-won. But Daniel, he had already taught me that brilliance, courage, and heart could overcome almost anything. And deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Rachel's determination was fierce, but Daniel's brilliance, combined with the love we shared, was fiercer. I could feel the storm coming, and I understood that we were about to face something even bigger than before. Something in the air told me that this fight would test every ounce of our strength, but I knew one thing for certain: Daniel's light could never be dimmed. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm on the horizon. I held Daniel's hand tightly as we walked into the courthouse, my heart pounding like a drum. The air felt thick with tension. I could feel Rachel's eyes on us, her smug smile hidden behind a mask of civility, and I knew she was prepared to throw every trick she had to take control of Daniel and his work. Daniel, despite his Down syndrome, walked with quiet confidence. He had faced illness, doubt, and fear before, and now he understood the world could be cruel, but he also understood that he had the power to fight back. I glanced down at him. His fingers fidgeted with the edge of his notebook, but his eyes were sharp, alert, and determined. He was ready. The courtroom was intimidating: harsh lighting, the stern faces of judges, and the cold formalities of the legal system. Rachel's lawyer presented documents, demanding custody and claiming Daniel's software belonged to her. Every line she read, every accusation made my chest tighten. I wanted to scream, to protect Daniel from the unfairness of it all. But I held my composure, squeezing his hand gently, reminding him silently, "We've got this together." Then Daniel stood. His small frame, so often underestimated by the world, became the center of attention. With calm precision, he opened his laptop and began to demonstrate his program, the software he had built, capable of verifying document authenticity. Every fake signature, every falsified claim was revealed clearly on the screen. The lawyers gasped, the judge leaned forward, and Rachel's confident smirk faltered. I felt tears welling up. My grandson, who had been left on my doorstep years ago, sick and scared, was now defending his own rights, his brilliance shining brighter than anyone could have imagined. Children with Down syndrome often face underestimation, but Daniel was proving the world wrong in the most spectacular way. His intelligence, patience, and focus were unstoppable. As the hearing continued, Rachel tried to argue, tried to twist, but Daniel's evidence was undeniable. Every line of code, every data point, every careful record he had kept became a shield, protecting him, protecting me, and protecting his future. I felt an overwhelming surge of pride and love. He was more than just a child with Down syndrome. He was a genius, a fighter, and a young man who refused to be underestimated. Then something unexpected happened. The judge asked Rachel a simple question about the authenticity of her documents. Her voice faltered. Her lies were unraveling. I held Daniel close, feeling the warmth of his tiny hand in mine, and I whispered, "You did it, baby. You showed them." But even with this victory, a tension lingered. Rachel didn't leave quietly. I could feel her anger simmering, the storm of her determination ready to strike again. And Daniel, he was already anticipating it. I watched him, exhausted from the stress and still recovering from past illnesses, lean forward and type, preparing for the next challenge. Children with Down syndrome face obstacles the world doesn't always see: health struggles, social misunderstandings, and underestimation. But Daniel's journey reminded me that love, patience, and belief could overcome nearly anything. And as we left the courtroom that day, I realized one thing: the fight for his future wasn't over, but he was more ready than anyone could imagine. Something whispered in my chest, a feeling that the next storm would be bigger, but Daniel's light would shine even brighter. That night after the courtroom, I stayed up long after Daniel had fallen asleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the stack of documents and thinking about the fight we had just faced. My chest felt heavy, like a storm was brewing inside me. Rachel hadn't disappeared quietly. She was planning her next move, and I knew it. My grandson had already faced abandonment, illness, and disbelief from the world, but now he was about to face her full wrath. I walked over to him, watching his chest rise and fall, peaceful in sleep. Children with Down syndrome can be sensitive to changes, to stress, to tension, and Daniel had already been through so much. His gentle heart, combined with his brilliant mind, needed protection. I brushed his hair back, whispering, "You are safe, baby, always." Even in sleep, I swear he smiled, as if he understood that we were in this together. The next morning brought tension like a thick fog. Rachel's team filed more documents, now claiming intellectual rights over Daniel's software, asserting that she had nurtured his talent, even though she hadn't been there for a single sick night, a single coding session, a single triumph. My heart pounded as I realized this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a battle for his identity, his achievements, and the world's recognition of his brilliance. Daniel, despite being just 14 and recovering from recent illness, was calm. I watched him as he reviewed lines of code, adjusting algorithms and verifying data. His Down syndrome meant he sometimes needed extra time to process, but his determination made him faster than anyone anticipated. He had developed not only the program, but also an instinct for problem-solving that could rival adults twice his age. At school, teachers noticed the change too. Some whispered in awe about his latest coding achievements. Others, still skeptical, suggested that someone his age and with Down syndrome could never handle the stress we were facing. I had to fight those judgments too, because they underestimated his resilience and intelligence. My chest ached, thinking of all the children like Daniel, judged before they could even show their true potential. As the day went on, Rachel arrived unexpectedly, leaning casually against the front door frame as if she owned the place. Her smile was sharp, calculated, and my stomach sank. She didn't notice that Daniel was already prepared. He had anticipated this, having created safeguards, backed up data, and prepared proofs to counter every claim she could throw at us. I watched in awe and pride as he navigated the laptop with patience, focus, and an almost magical calm. Even in the face of threats, he didn't panic. Children with Down syndrome often respond intensely to stress, but Daniel had built resilience. His illness, his challenges, his early struggles had made him strong in ways the world didn't understand. Watching him, I felt both tears and laughter, the mixture of pride, relief, and disbelief at how unstoppable he had become. I knelt beside him, squeezing his hand gently. "You are more brilliant than the world knows," I whispered. He looked at me, small smile on his face, eyes tired but filled with determination. In that quiet moment, I realized something vital. Our fight was bigger than just legal papers or courtrooms. It was about protecting the spirit, talent, and identity of a child who deserved recognition, love, and respect. And in that silent room, I felt it. The storm wasn't over. But Daniel's light was stronger than any shadow she could cast. The morning sun streamed weakly through the curtains, but my chest felt heavy, weighed down by the storm that was Rachel. She hadn't given up, not for a second. Overnight, her legal team had filed new motions, now claiming that Daniel's software profits belonged to her. The thought made my hands shake. Years of nurturing him, of watching him grow through illness, doubt, and challenge, now threatened to be erased with a few signatures and false claims. Daniel, as always, was calm. His little fingers danced across the laptop keys, eyes focused and steady. Despite his Down syndrome, despite the lingering fatigue from recent illness, he approached this challenge with the same patience and brilliance that had carried him through every obstacle before. I watched him, heart pounding with pride and fear, marveling at his resilience. Children like him are often underestimated, yet here he was, defying expectations with a quiet power that could move mountains. At breakfast, he talked about his plans. "Grandma," he said softly, "I can prove it. I can show the world what's real and what's fake." I nodded, choking back tears. He had learned so much, not just coding, not just problem-solving, but courage. His Down syndrome hadn't limited him. It had shaped him, giving him focus, clarity, and a depth of patience many adults lacked. The courthouse was tense that day. Rachel's smug demeanor hid behind a veneer of professionalism, but I could see it in her eyes, the threat, the greed, the belief that she could rewrite our story. I squeezed Daniel's hand, whispering, "You are ready, baby. You've always been ready." He gave a faint smile, his fingers tapping calmly on his cube as if rehearsing the proof he was about to reveal. When the hearing began, Rachel's lawyer laid out her claims with practiced precision. My stomach twisted. Every word was designed to intimidate, to make Daniel's achievements seem like hers, to make me doubt myself. But Daniel, my brilliant, resilient, gentle Daniel, stepped up. With patience and precision, he demonstrated his software, showing how it could verify every document, every signature, every financial claim. The room went silent. Judges, lawyers, even Rachel stared at the screen in disbelief. I felt tears prick my eyes. This boy, who had been abandoned, who had faced sickness, judgment, and the weight of misunderstanding, was proving the world wrong in the most spectacular way. Children with Down syndrome are often underestimated, their intelligence overlooked, but Daniel's brilliance shone brighter than anyone had imagined. His calm, methodical approach exposed the lies, the falsifications, and the manipulations. Rachel's face hardened, her confidence cracking. She tried to argue to twist the evidence, but Daniel remained unshaken. His Down syndrome had taught him patience, focus, and the power of steady determination. And now, in that courtroom, his strength became our shield. After hours of tense argument, the judge paused, studying the evidence. My heart raced. Every protective instinct, every sleepless night, every whispered encouragement to Daniel, all led to this moment. He looked up at me, exhausted but calm, and I realized something profound. He had grown into his own strength, capable of defending not just his work, but his life, his achievements, and his right to be recognized as the brilliant young man he was. As we left the courthouse that evening, the weight of fear and anticipation still clung to us, but a spark of hope shone brighter than ever. Daniel's Down syndrome didn't define him. It amplified his courage, his resilience, and his genius. And deep down, I knew this fight wasn't over, but we had proven one undeniable truth. Love, patience, and determination could overcome even the strongest deceit. Something told me that the real storm was approaching, but Daniel's light had already begun to blaze brighter than the shadows around us. The days after the last hearing felt like walking on a tightrope. Every knock on the door made my heart skip a beat. Rachel hadn't vanished. She was calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I knew she would. Children like Daniel with Down syndrome often sense tension before words are spoken, and I could see him quietly anticipating the storm. But there was something extraordinary about him. Despite the looming threat, his spirit was calm, focused, and brave. Daniel had been recovering from the stress and fatigue of the previous courtroom battle. His little body sometimes trembled after long days, his Down syndrome making him more sensitive to stress and illness. But he refused to let it slow him down. Sitting at his desk, surrounded by cubes, papers, and his laptop, he typed meticulously, his focus sharper than ever. I watched him in awe. Children often underestimated him because of his condition, but he had already proved that his heart, mind, and patience were unstoppable. One evening, Rachel appeared at our doorstep unannounced. My chest tightened. She smiled, a dangerous, calculated smile, like she already believed victory was in her hands. I steadied my voice, masking the fear bubbling inside me. Daniel, surprisingly calm, opened his laptop and began reviewing his program, his software that had already exposed her lies once before. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. My heart swelled with pride and anxiety all at once. She tried to intimidate me with threats of legal action, claiming ownership over Daniel's software, his work, even his achievements. Every word cut like a knife, but I held my ground. I knelt beside Daniel, brushing his hair back gently. "You've already shown them, baby," I whispered. "We know the truth." His tiny hand reached for mine, gripping it with quiet strength. That small gesture reminded me that courage can come in the smallest forms. Rachel didn't leave quietly. Instead, she tried to manipulate, to twist narratives, to create doubt among everyone around us. I could feel Daniel's tension rising. Children with Down syndrome often feel emotions intensely. They internalize stress and worry. But he remained focused, his calm presence defying the chaos she tried to impose. That night, as I tucked him into bed, I noticed the subtle signs of exhaustion, slight coughs, heavy eyelids, the faint tremor in his hands. My heart broke. Even the strongest warriors need rest, and Daniel had carried so much on his young shoulders. I held him close, whispering, "You are the strongest boy I know. Nothing can take that away." He murmured softly, almost like a promise, "I'll be okay, Grandma, I always am." And for a moment, I believed him completely. But the next morning brought more tension. Rachel had escalated to media attention, trying to frame the story as if I had withheld opportunities from Daniel, painting herself as the devoted mother who had always been there. My chest tightened as I realized the battle wasn't just legal anymore. It was now in public opinion, in the court of the world's eyes. Daniel, however, was ready. Despite the lingering fatigue, he reviewed every line of his code, checked every backup, and prepared defenses that only a mind like his could conceive. His Down syndrome had shaped him, teaching patience, resilience, and extraordinary focus. And now, those same qualities would be the key to navigating this storm. As I watched him, I felt a mix of fear and awe. The road ahead was dangerous, filled with deceit and betrayal. But Daniel's light, the brilliance, patience, and courage that had carried us through every obstacle, was ready to shine brighter than ever. Something whispered to me that the final confrontation was near, and the world was about to see the unstoppable strength of a boy who refused to be underestimated. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Every eye was on us, but all I could see was Daniel, my brilliant, gentle, extraordinary Daniel. He had endured so much: abandonment, illness, endless doubt, and now, the final confrontation with Rachel and her army of lawyers. Children with Down syndrome are often underestimated, their potential questioned at every turn, but Daniel had already shattered every expectation placed on him. Today, he was going to show the world the full measure of his courage and brilliance. Rachel's face was cold, her confidence wavering as she presented her case. Her words, her threats, her attempts to manipulate, all fell flat against the reality of what Daniel had built. The software he had designed, originally meant to verify document authenticity, was now more than a tool. It was proof of truth, of justice, and of the countless nights he had spent perfecting it while battling fatigue, stress, and the challenges of Down syndrome. Daniel sat at the small table beside me, fingers lightly touching the keys, his eyes calm, determined. He explained each step, each algorithm, each proof with patience and clarity that left the courtroom silent. Even the judge leaned in, intrigued and impressed. I felt tears welling up, my heart swelling with pride. This boy, who the world had doubted for so long, was not only defending himself, he was teaching everyone about patience, resilience, and brilliance in unexpected places. Rachel tried to interrupt, tried to twist the narrative, but Daniel was unshakable. His Down syndrome had shaped him with a focus and precision that no amount of fear or manipulation could disrupt. He calmly showed the falsified documents, traced signatures, and demonstrated how every claim she had made was a lie. The courtroom held its breath as his work unfolded, layer by layer, undeniable, irrefutable. I watched him, my chest tight, my heart full, as the judge nodded in understanding. The tension, the fear, the sleepless nights, they were all leading to this. Daniel's health, which had worried me so much, his fragility, his gentle nature, they were never weaknesses. They had shaped him into a mind capable of confronting deceit and injustice with brilliance and courage. Finally, the judge spoke, the words ringing through the room like music. The decision was clear. Full custody and guardianship remained with me. Daniel's rights, his achievements, his life were protected. Rachel was referred for prosecution, her plans crumbling before the proof Daniel had presented. I felt a rush of relief, pride, and overwhelming love. My arms wrapped around him, holding him close, feeling the warmth and life of this remarkable young man. As we left the courtroom, the sunlight felt different, warmer, brighter, more forgiving. Daniel held my hand, small but strong, and smiled. "We did it, Grandma," he whispered, tired but triumphant. I hugged him tighter, thinking about the years we had spent together, the long nights, the routines, the therapies, the coding sessions, the laughter, and the tears. Every challenge, every obstacle had led us to this moment. Back home, life settled into a quiet rhythm again, but with a new purpose. Daniel went on to establish a company that employed autistic individuals, celebrating their unique talents, just as his own brilliance had been celebrated in that courtroom. His health remained a priority, but his confidence, independence, and determination grew stronger every day. Children with Down syndrome, I realized, could change the world if given love, support, and opportunity. And in those quiet evenings, as Daniel rested his head on my shoulder, I would whisper to him, "You are unstoppable, my love. You always have been." He would smile softly, content, knowing that no storm, no obstacle, no doubt could ever diminish his light. This was more than a victory. It was proof that love, patience, and belief in potential could create miracles, even in the face of abandonment, illness, and doubt. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and join us. Let's celebrate courage, love, and the amazing potential in every child.